session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. May I call on our distinguished Majority Floor Leader, Senator Francis Tol and Tolentino, to lead the chamber in prayer. You may proceed, sir. Thank you, Ms. Manuel. The Secretary will please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, Senator Zubiri, the Senate President.
With 22 senators present, Chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, before we proceed with the calendar for the day, we'd like to acknowledge some guests present in the gallery. Board Member Ram Revilla of Cavite, and the guests and companions of Ms. Andrea Manuel, our lyric soprano, Mr. President. We welcome the guests, Mr. President.
Welcome to your Senate.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journals of the 26th session, Tuesday, September 24, 2024, and the 27th session, Wednesday, September 25, 2024, and consider them as approved.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to consider on third reading House Bill number 9656. This is the bill on the Zamboanga Regional Medical Center. The printed copies were electronically distributed to the members of this chamber on October 30, 2024, in compliance with the 3-day rule of the Constitution. I've so moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, consideration of House Bill number 9656 on third reading is now in order. Senate Secretary is directed to read the title only of the bill and to proceed to roll call vote.
An act renaming the Mindanao Central Sanitarium in Paso Bolong, Zamboanga City to Zamboanga Regional Medical Center. Roll call vote. The Honorable Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, Senator Zubiri, the Senate President.
With 22 affirmative votes, 0 negatives, 0 abstention, House Bill number 9656 is approved on third reading. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 1209. This is the resolution congratulating and commending the Senate Sentinels basketball team. I retract my previous motion, Mr. President, due to the non-attendance yet of the Senate team.
As of yet. Yes.
As of yet. Mr. Except for the 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.
I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Secretary General is directed to proceed.
Messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House informing the Senate and certifying that on 25 September 2024, it passed House number 10800, appropriating funds for the operation of the government of the Republic of the Philippines from January 1 to December 31, 2025, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate.
To the Committee on Finance.
Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 25 September 2024, it adopted House Concurrent Resolution 37. Concurrent resolution including the 10 enlisted men's barangays in the 2 legislative districts of the City of Taguig and Municipality of Pateros in order not to disenfranchise the registered voters therein, and confirming the increase to 12 of the number of councilors in each councilor district of the City of Taguig for purposes of fair and equitable representation, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate.
To the archives.
Bills on first reading, Senate number 2841, further expanding the definition of the crime of rape, amending Act number 3815 as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code, and for other purposes. Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
2842, increasing the salary grade level of social worker position from salary grade 11 to salary grade 15 and providing funds therefore. Senator Ontiveros.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, Professional Regulation, Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, and Finance.
2843, strengthening the Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program for peace through Parent Leaders Adult Education Program. Senator Ontiveros.
To the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, Economic Affairs, and Finance.
2844, granting Starlink Internet Services Philippines, Inc., a franchise to construct, maintain, and operate satellite ground stations for the provision of broadband Internet services in the Philippines. Senator Poe.
To the Committee on Rules.
2845, expanding the purpose and application of the Special Education Fund, amending Section 272 of RA 7160, the Local Government Code of 1991, and for other purposes. Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Local Government and Basic Education.
2846, regulating the practice of plumbing engineering in the Philippines, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes. Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
2847, creating the National Foreign Relations Council, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes. Senator Tolentino.
To the Committees on Foreign Relations and Finance.
2848, establishing the Liwanag at Tubig Assistance Welfare Program for low-income households in times of calamities and natural disasters. Senator Tolentino.
To the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, and Finance.
2849, an act to further enhance the implementation of the lifeline rate, amending Section 73 of RA 9136, the IPIRA of 2001 as amended. Senator Tolentino.
To the Committee on Public Services.
2850, expanding the purpose and application of the Special Education Fund, amending Section 272 of RA 7160, the Local Government Code of 1991, and for other purposes.
To the
Senator
committee-
Cayetano P.
To the Committees on Local Government and Basic Education.
2851, providing for a minimum wage for farmers, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes. Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Food and Agrarian Reform, and Finance.
Resolutions. Proposed Senate Resolution 1209, congratulating and commending the Senate Sentinels for winning its second consecutive championship at the UNTV Executive Phase of Senator Escudero.
To the Committee on Rules.
1210, commending and congratulating Tatiana Kisha Mangin for winning the gold medal in the women's 49 kilogram category at the World Taekwondo Junior Championships held in South Korea from October 1 to 6, 2024. Senator Estrada.
To the Committee on Rules.
1211, directing the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality to conduct an inquiry into the reported cases of women being trafficked abroad to become surrogates as part of an infant trafficking scheme. Senator Ontiveros.
To the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality.
1212, congratulating and commending Tatiana Mangin for being the first Filipina to win the gold medal at the World Taekwondo Junior Championships. Senator Villanueva.
To the Committee on Rules.
1213, congratulating and commending Major Floren Herrera for becoming the first Filipino recipient of the Alexander R. Nininger Award for Valor at Arms. Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Rules.
1214, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the illegal engagement of 20 Filipinas in Cambodia for underground commercial gestational surrogacy. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality.
1215, congratulating and commending the Philippine Paralympic delegation for their remarkable performance and valiant effort in the 2024 Paris Paralympics, bringing pride and honor to the country. Senator Cayetano P.
To the Committee on Rules.
1216, congratulating and commending Padel Filipinas and national team athletes Tao Yi Tan and Marian Cappadocia for being the first all-Filipina champions at the Asia Pacific Padel Tour. Senator Cayetano P.
To the Committee on Rules.
1217, directing the Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs to conduct an inquiry on the campaign against illegal drugs by the Duterte administration. Senator Go.
To the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations.
Additional reference of business. Bills on first reading. Senate number 2852, further strengthening the incentives of private sector participation in public educational institutions, amending for the purpose RA 8525, the Adopt a School Act of 1998, Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Basic Education, Higher Technical Vocational Education, and Ways and Means.
2853, institutionalizing the career progression system for public school teachers, appropriating funds therefore, Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, Basic Education, and Finance.
2854, granting universal social pension to senior citizens, amending RA 7432, an act to maximize the contribution of senior citizens to nation building, grant benefits and privileges, and for other purposes, Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, and Finance.
2855, strengthening the practice of midwifery as a profession in the Philippines, appropriating funds, and for other purposes, Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
2856, promoting and supporting the development and growth of the Philippine film industry, creating for this purpose the Philippine Film Commission, defining its powers and functions, and for other purposes, Senator Estrada.
The Committees on Public Information and Mass Media, Ways and Means, and Finance.
2857, providing for the promotion of film and television tourism, creating the Film Philippines Office, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Estrada.
To the Committees on Public Information and Mass Media, Tourism, Ways and Means, and Finance.
2858, mandating the local government units to establish, maintain, and operate handog na oportunidad para sa edukasyon, centers, and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Estrada.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Local Government, and Finance.
2859, strengthening the governance and management of the Philippine Science High School system, and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Estrada.
To the Committee on National Defense and Security, Peace, Unification, and Reconciliation, and Finance.
2860, providing for the establishment of a disaster food bank and stockpile for every province and highly urbanized city in the Philippines, providing for their maintenance and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Estrada.
Prior to referring this, may the Chair clarify that Senate Bill number 2859 is referred to the Committee on Science and Technology, Ways and Means, and Finance. And this current bill, read by the distinguished Secretary General, is referred to the Committee on National Defense and Security, Peace, Unification, and Reconciliation, and Finance.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
Just a point of order. May we ask the technical group to have the bills being referred flashed on the screen, because apparently it was discontinued a few minutes ago, Mr. President.
The Secretariat is directed to comply with the request of the majority floor leader, experiencing some technical difficulties, but I was informed that copies of the additional reference were distributed physically to the members as well, because they might need, I was informed they might need a little more time to so reflect it on the screen. We are on page 3. No, page 2 of the additional reference.
Page 3.
Secretary General is directed to proceed.
Senate number 2861, an act granting Philippine citizenship to Andres Miguel Soriano IV, Senator Tolentino.
To the Committee on Rules.
Senate number 2862, an act setting the first regular elections in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, amending for the purpose Article 16, Section 13 of RA 11054, the organic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao as amended. Senator Escudero.
To the Committee on Local Government.
Resolutions. Proposed Senate Resolution number 1218, directing the appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry on the present circumstances of the Center for International Trade Expositions and Missions, with the end in view of formulating policies for reforming it. Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship.
1219, congratulating and commending Muhammad Nur Kasib of the Philippine Science High School, Central Mindanao Campus, for securing the Philippines' first ever gold medal in International Astronomy Astrophysics Olympiad 2024 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
1220, congratulating and commending CJ Opiaza for finishing first runner-up in Miss Grand International 2024 held on October 25, 2024 in Bangkok, Thailand. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
1221, congratulating and commending the Philippine Junior Men's Artistic Gymnastic Team led by Carl L. Druyulo and Jacob Alvarez for their outstanding achievements at the JRC Artistic Stars Championships in Thailand. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
1222, congratulating and commending the Philippine Men's Baseball Team for winning their 5th consecutive title in the East Asia Baseball Cup. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
1223, resolution honoring former Senate President Juan Ponce Enrile for his untiring service and contributions to the country and the Filipino people. Senator
To the
Escudero.
Committee on Rules.
Committee Report 333 by the Committee on Tourism upon the recommendation of the Subcommittee on Senate numbers 2797, 2790, 2435, 1854, and House numbers 5598, 8004, 6467, 10116, and 5282. Introduced by Senator Lapid, an act declaring the province of Pampanga as the culinary capital of the Philippines, recommending its approval without amendment, taking into consideration Senate numbers 2790 and 2806, and House number 10634, sponsor Senator Villar M.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move for a 5-minute suspension of the session to enable the members of this chamber to go into a caucus as requested by the Honorable Senate President.
May I invite our distinguished colleagues to the lounge, not only to partake of a meal, but also to discuss, to be chaired by Senator Grace Poe, the chairperson of our Finance Committee, the upcoming schedule regarding the budget. Session is suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2793. This is the bill on the Philippine Natural Gas Industry Development Act.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume the period of individual amendments.
Well, actually, Mr. President, I understand that Senator Tulfo, the previous chairman of the Committee on Energy, wanted to deliver a privileged speech first, and the Senate President...
Yes,
I
during the
said-
break, Senator Pia,
So we'll start with
yes,
this
he
first.
intimated to me
Okay.
that
Okay.
the period of interpellation regarding the NatGas will be ahead.
So, Mr. President, I move to resume the period of individual amendments without prejudice to ask clarificatory questions using the clean copy of the bill as of September 25, 2024 as our working draft and recognize the sponsor, Senator Pia Cayetano. So move, Mr. President.
Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am just setting up my notes, but we are ready to proceed in a few seconds. Mr. President, we are ready to make our proposed amendments. On Section 2, Declaration of Policy, subsection K. This is an amendment of Senator Gatchalian. This is on page 3, line 1. Delete the word reasonable and replace it with low cost. And on the same page, line 1, after the word gas, insert the phrase pursuant to Republic Act number 7638 or the Department of Energy Act of 1992. We submit, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you. The next item is also on Section 2, still on the Declaration of Policy, subsection M, also an amendment of Senator Gatchalian. On page 3, line 7, after the word aggregation, delete the phrase as a nationwide or grid-wide strategy in order to mitigate. And on the same page, delete line 8 and replace it with whenever economically beneficial for end users and to contribute to mitigating natural gas supply and price shocks. We
Is there
submit.
an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
A minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended for a minute. Please proceed.
Section 4,
Mr. President, I just
Yes,
got-
Majority Leader.
Just an interjection, just got hold of a copy of the September 25, 2024, and the previous amendment refers to line 7, letter M. Is that correct?
yes, Mr. President.
Just to spread into the records, the purpose of this amendment relative to the mitigation of end users' exposure to risks associated with natural gas availability. May we know from the sponsor the reason behind this, just to make this part of the records of this proceedings, Mr. President?
So this is an amendment of Senator Gatchalian, which the committee has accepted, and we accepted this with our understanding that the concern of Senator Gatchalian is that when we have aggregation, we need to ensure that the prices are beneficial to the consumer. So this is a proactive consumer initiative, which we accept, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. We now proceed, Senator Pia.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Majority Floor Leader. So the next item is Section 4, definition of terms, subsection B on aggregation. On page 4, line 9, delete the word required and insert the phrase, DOE shall determine the requirements to be an aggregator and designate the same as well as the. And then on the same page, line 10, delete the phrase shall be determined by the DOE. And on the same page, line 11, after the word account, insert the phrase consumer welfare. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection?
Mr. President, may we ask from the sponsor, her indulgence again, how would this now be read as amended?
Sure, Mr. President. So the entire section B shall read as follows. Aggregation refers to the activity of procuring indigenous natural gas, combining it with imported LNG, and selling the aggregated gas to gas buyers in the Philippines or abroad by a participant known as an aggregator. The DOE shall determine the requirements to be an aggregator and designate the same, as well as the minimum percentage of indigenous natural gas for aggregation, taking into account consumer welfare, the production levels of indigenous natural gas sources, the capacity of existing and future PDNGI facilities, and other relevant factors to ensure a stable and reliable supply of natural gas.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the lines now would probably occupy until line number 17. Am I correct, Mr. President?
Are we using the same, no?
Yes, yes.
We have the same
I have a
copy?
copy of September 25, 2024, clean copy. So na-adjust na po lahat yun, Mr. President.
Right. Are you done with your questioning?
Yes,
Majority
Mr. President.
Leader? Okay, there is a pending motion by Senator Pierre with regard to the amendment of Section B.
Yes.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next item is still on Section 4, definition of terms, subsection Z, and this is on page 7, line 11, delete if and replace it with which are. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next item is still on Section 4, definition of terms, and this is on page 8, line 8, delete if and replace it with which are. We submit.
Any objection? There
Mr.
being none?
President, just one
Majority Leader.
clarificatory question. So it will now read wherever economically. Can we have the complete amended phrase, Mr. President?
Yes.
If we delete the word if.
It's actually just a style amendment, which to this representation would be more accurate. The last sentence of that paragraph Z would read, the plan shall likewise include all studies, programs, and policies for the promotion and development of the distribution sector which are economically beneficial for end users.
So it will now, Mr. President, just a clarification again. So it will no longer be transmission sector as originally written, but distribution sector. But the previous amendment,
No, Mr. President, we are only replacing the word if
If.
with which are.
so it's the if I'm not mistaken, Mr. President, I heard it right. So it's for the development of the distribution sector,
Sector.
not transmission.
Well, there's a couple of lines that have the same amendment, so perhaps the next one.
Because my copy, Mr.
The
President,
next one,
refers to transmission.
yes. No, Mr. President, that is in
Page-
subparagraph double E. So the first
Yes.
the first time I made that similar amendment, is on letter Z, and that's distribution sector, which are,
Can I have a 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Mr. President, this representation is now clarified. We're referring to the previous page, page 7. And page 7 was the first amendment introduced, and it refers to the words distribution sector on line 11. I was referring to page 8 on line number 8. It's the same, Mr. President.
yes. Yes, and we've made that proposal. I can't recall if it has, the motion has been
Yes.
accepted.
Okay, there is a pending motion by Senator Pia. Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next one is still on section 4 on the definition of terms. It is on page 8, line 27. A similar amendment, delete the word if and replace it with which are.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
The next amendment is on section 4, also definition of terms. This is a Senator Risa Hontiveros amendment, which includes a style change. On page 8, after line 27, insert a new subsection JJ, which shall read as follows. JJ, renewable gases refer to hydrogen, ammonia, biomethane, synthetic methane, and other gases derived from renewable sources. And re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next amendment is Section 5 on powers and responsibilities of the DOE, subsection F. This is a Senator Gatchalian amendment with some revisions. On page 12, line 19, after the word regulations, insert colon and the sentence, provided that this applies to sales of shares that would result in a change in control of the permit holder or its ultimate parent. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President,
Yes,
Mr.
with the
President,
permission of Senator Tita.
apologize
Senator Sherwin.
for this anterior amendment, Mr. President. This is still on page 9, Mr. President. Page 9, line 10, after the word DOE, replace the phrase, which shall set the performance standard for TPA, with the phrase for PGI facilities, colon, provided that the TPA code for conventional transportation system shall be promulgated by the ERC.
What does the sponsor say?
Page 9, line 10. This is on the clean copy, dated September 25.
Can His Honor repeat that?
Page 9, line 10.
Yes.
After the word DOE,
A DOE?
yes.
Okay, okay.
Replace
insert.
the phrase, which shall set the performance standard for TPA, with the phrase for PDNGI facilities, colon, provided that the TPA code for conventional transportation system shall be promulgated by ERC. And the reason for that, Mr. President, is the conventional transportation system are considered public utility, and in this concept, whenever it's public utility, the ERC will regulate it, Mr. President. So that's the rationale why we included that. For virtual transportation system, that will be under the DOE, Mr. President. So that's the rationale, Mr. President.
Just an interjection, Mr. President. Can we ask the proponent to have the entire provision, the entire subsection be
MM,
read
correct.
in its entirety, Mr. President?
So, Mr. President, a third-party access code or TPA code refers to the code formulated by the DOE for PDNGI facilities, provided that the TPA code for conventional transportation systems shall be promulgated by the ERC. This is only insofar as the TPA code for conventional transportation system, Mr. President, the third-party access code.
And subject to style.
Yeah, but actually, Mr. President, it took me a while to study this, no, because it's technical, as we can all see. This amendment is not acceptable to DOE because per DOE, they are the ones that have the expertise when it comes to third-party access of natural gas. Under IPIRA, ERC regulates when it is power-related. So prior to power conversion, or if it is sold for non-power purpose, it is DOE that has the jurisdiction. Fuel like coal and petroleum is within the jurisdiction of ERC only when it becomes a component of power generation. So unfortunately, we can't accept it, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, just a clarificatory question, Mr. President. For public utilities, I think this was also raised by the majority floor leader, for pipelines, which are also which are named conventional transport system. These are considered public utilities. And public utilities are regulated, Mr. President. So in this concept, the regulation will fall under DOE or ERC. And the reason why we propose this, because ERC is already currently the regulator of power, Mr. President. And in the proposal, it will also be the regulator for pipelines, Mr. President, because currently, there's no regulator for pipelines. So it will now fall under DOE,
Yes.
ERC, Mr.
No,
President.
pipeline is under DOE, Mr. President, unless we change the rules, but pipeline is currently under DOE.
For the policy, Mr. President, but for the regulation of pricing, regulation of use, Mr. President, so.
It's not covered by the mandate of ERC.
Mr. President, can I ask for a minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Mr. President, upon consultation with our colleagues, the majority floor leader and the former chairman of the Committee on Energy, Senator Gatchalian, we have agreed that the best thing to do right now is to leave the provision as is, wherein DOE will technically be the regulator for the time being, because the proper instrument for the inclusion in the power of ERC to regulate these pipelines would be in the amendment to the ERC, the IPIRA law, which is already ongoing with the committee that this representation chairs. So the two gentlemen are amenable to that, Mr. President. So we will leave the provision as is.
All right. Noted.
Thank you. Thank you to the good sponsor.
Mr. President, the Deputy Minority Leader is seeking the floor.
Yes.
I move that she be recognized.
Yes, with the permission of Senator Cayetano, the Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa is recognized.
Salamat po, Mr. President, and salamat to the good sponsor and the gentleman from Valenzuela and the majority leader. Just a point of clarification, Mr. President. Nalito yata ako. I thought I recalled na yung previous session, hindi po natapos yung period of committee amendments. Dahil at that time, the chair was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I remember that the chair at that time was still considering which of our proposed amendments ay, kumbaga, aampunin na niya as committee amendments. So I just would like to see clarification. Ano po ba yung parliamentary situation ng bill na ito? Because I came back into the session hall thinking nasa period of committee amendments pa rin tayo. But then I realized when the good gentleman from Valenzuela interjected, napatanong po ako, Mr. President, nasa period of individual amendments na po ba?
Yes.
So just to clarify the parliamentary situation to this representation, Mr. President, I raise this point of inquiry. Salamat
Yes,
po,
we're,
Mr.
we're in the
President.
period of individual amendment, Mr. President. Yes. No, we started with individual because this is a sub-bill already.
Substitute bill.
Yes, a substitute bill.
So we are in the period of individual
Individual.
amendments, Mr. President,
Yes.
for the record. All right. Salamat po, Mr. President, and to the colleagues on the floor.
Thank you, Senator Risa. You may now proceed, Senator Pia.
Sure. Okay. Our next amendment is on Section 5, Powers and Responsibilities of the DOE, new subsection M. This is a Senator Hontiveros amendment with some styles change. On page 13, after line 12, insert a new subsection M, which shall read as, develop a comprehensive national strategy with input from the National Renewable Energy Board, parentheses NREP, close parentheses, for integrating renewable gases into the energy mix and outlining the roadmap for their adoption. Reletter the succeeding subsection accordingly. We submit.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next amendment is Section 5, Powers and Responsibilities of the ERC. This is a Senator Gatchalian amendment with revisions. On page 13, delete lines 18 to 24 and replace it with, the powers of the ERC shall be in accordance with the provisions of the EPIRA on the organization, operation, regulation of the power industry, and such other powers as may be given to it under applicable law. We submit.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Yes.
anterior,
Yes, with
anterior
the permission of
amendment,
Senator Cayetano.
Mr.
Senator
President,
Gatchalian.
on page 12, line 19, after the word regulations, insert the phrase provided that this also applies to sales of shares tantamount to a change in control of the permit holder or its ultimate parent. Provided further that assignment or transfer shall not be allowed near the end of life of a PDNGI facility. So moved, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I'm checking, Mr. President, because we already read a similar
Oh.
amendment into the record. I'm just checking the difference between what we read and what His Honor is proposing.
Itong mga
Mr. President, there were concerns, I believe the proposal of His Honor now was included in the submissions made to us, no?
Yes, Mr. President.
And that part raised some red flags among the team in our discussions with the Department of Energy, because it may be tantamount to a violation of the constitutional provision on right to property. Does His Honor have any thoughts on it? This representation is very open. Our goal is really to accommodate as many of His Honor's amendments, especially given his experience. But I just wanted to raise that. And does His Honor have any? Would His Honor like to elaborate so we can weigh in on it?
Yeah. Well, Mr. President, this stemmed from the experience, our experience from Malampaya, wherein the sellers of Malampaya and the buyers of Malampaya argued that there was no change in entities because only shares exchange hands. But we all know right now that there was a change in control and even management of that entity. So to circumvent the government approval, what these entities are doing is to exchange shares and argue that there is no change in the corporation. So,
But that part, Your Honor, has been
okay,
accepted.
Mr. President.
That part is accepted, so we don't need
okay,
to...
Mr. President.
The
The proviso,
next- the
Mr.
next
President,
one.
actually
The
the
next
proviso
one.
came
The
from...
end of life.
Yeah, the end of
Yeah.
life. The proviso came from a research that we conducted in the U.S. wherein some of the assets, for example, nuclear assets or even natural gas asset, at the end of life, they will sell it to a shell company to release them from the obligation of winding down or spending for closure expenses, Mr. President, or decommissioning expenses. And then that shell company will declare bankruptcy, Mr. President, releasing the original company of its obligation to decommission the asset, Mr. President. And that has been I read several articles to that effect, Mr. President, that happened in the U.S. So just to avoid a scenario wherein there's a decommissioning requirement, but that entity will circumvent that requirement by selling the
Yes,
assets
yes.
to a shell company,
Yes.
Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, I'd like to react to that. This representation totally agrees with the concern raised by His Honor. We really wouldn't want that to happen because today we are very much aware of the obligations, very, very important obligations that will only occur towards the end of
Yes,
life. Yun nga yung mga
correct, Mr. President.
decommissioning. It's very relevant in the energy sector, no, in the mining sector,
Correct,
things
Mr.
like that.
President.
So this representation would be inclined to accept this amendment if it refers to a shell company. I'm just thinking also, though, of what if there is a potential buyer who is interested in pouring in more funds. Like in the case of Malampaya now, they're going to drill again. So talagang end of life yung current, but they're going to drill again, and there's a new investor who wants to come in for that reason. Let's say the current investor has already invested what it could or has somehow invested somewhere else. I wouldn't want to deprive us of that opportunity of bringing in a fresh investor who truly has good intentions. So subject to style with His Honor.
Yes, Mr.
Can
President,
His
we're
Honor
open to
work
that.
with us
Yeah,
on-
Mr. President,
on that?
my proposal really stemmed from circumventing the obligation
Yes,
for
of course.
decommissioning, Mr.
So-
President. So
so
if we
let's
can
work
narrow
with
it
that.
down
Okay.
to that,
Yes.
objective, we're open to that,
Okay,
Mr. President,
so
subject to style.
with that in mind, let's ask our staff to work while I'm going through the other amendments, and then maybe towards the end, we can already have something.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. So,
So we will hold it in abeyance?
yes, Mr. President, please.
All right. Please proceed to your next amendment.
So we go back to, tama ba? All right. So our next amendment is Section 6, Powers and Responsibilities of the ERC, and this is a Senator Gatchalian amendment with revision. On page 13, delete lines 18 to 24 and replace it with, "The powers of the ERC shall be in accordance with," I've read this. I think this, I'll just read it again. This is what I think was on the table when His Honor made his intervention. The powers of the ERC shall be in accordance with the provisions of the IPIRA on the organization, operation, regulation of the power industry, and such other powers as may be given to it under applicable law. We submit, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, just a clarification.
Yes, Majority
Would
Leader.
would this now probably encapsulate in the near future, in the event that the IPIRA law is amended, the future powers of IPIRA as amended? Would the language include?
Yes, under applicable law. So I believe, Mr. President, when we do amend IPIRA, this will still be, they will be consistent, Mr. President.
Or delegated to it the pursuant to this act. Subject to style, Mr. President, I think that's correct.
Okay, I'm happy to have any other style change to reflect future amendments to IPIRA.
Okay,
We
please
can proceed, Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. President, I have an anterior amendment, Mr. President. On
Senator
page,
Gatchalian?
yes, thank you. On page 13, lines 19 to 20, delete the phrase
18 to 20.
"and Section 11 of RA 11646, otherwise known as the Microgrid Systems Act."
That has been accepted
Accept-
already.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, Mr. President.
So the next item is on Section 15, Powers and Responsibilities of the National Commission on Indigenous People.
Page.
On page 17, line 15. After the word "upon," delete the article "the." That is all, Mr. President, we submit.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the sponsors, the deputy minority leaders is likewise seeking the floor.
Okay.
move
With
that
the
she be
permission of
recognized.
Senator Cayetano, Senator Ontiveros recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. With apologies to my colleagues on the floor, I wish to raise, originally I was going to raise these anterior amendments after the good chair and the gentleman from Valenzuela finished with the individual amendments. But upon consultation with the majority leader and the good majority leader's advice to raise them now before we go further in the bill, I will do so. I'd just like to make of record, Mr. President, that I submitted these amendments before this clean copy as of September 25 was drawn up. But I'm, as of today, still waiting for feedback regarding my proposed amendments. So I apologize that
yeah.
my anterior amendments, yung pagination nila, at saka yung line, will not correspond anymore to the clean copy as of September 25. Kasi ito pong anterior
Previous.
amendments ko were based on the previous clean copy, and these anterior amendments to which I was still awaiting feedback on up to today. So just for the record, Mr. President. So if I may...
If I may
Yes,
also,
Mr.
before
President.
Her Honor continues, so Her Honor is correct. We received the written amendments from different senators, including Her Honor Senator Risa Hontiveros, and what you will see in the clean copy now and the additional amendments we are making, which is following the chronological order, are those that we are accepting. So the amendments that have already been read, that has passed the section, have not been accepted. But Her Honor is free to put it on the floor and we can give an official response. But just to advise that that is really the situation. We tried to accept as much as we can for the consistency of the bill and pursuant to its objective. I apologize that we're not able to accept all, but we're happy to have Her Honor explain if she wants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and to the good chair.
Maybe if Her Honor can make reference to the section also to make it easy for
Yes.
us to follow.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you also to the good chair for actually completing my understanding of the earlier query I raised as to the parliamentary situation.
And if I may
of
just
the bill.
add
Yes, Mr.
also,
President.
it's my attending the energy conference in Singapore that aided me in also understanding so much of the energy industry, which admittedly is new to me. I think we only have one resident expert, Senator Gatchalian, who has been handling this for many years. So a lot of Her Honor's amendments became clearer to me upon listening hours and hours to these experts in energy on chemicals and very technical terms. So we will continue to try.
Mr. President, just to
Majority Leader.
interject, what the Deputy Minority Leader now would be doing is to restate her previous proposed amendments, and the good sponsor will just give a direct answer on why such amendments were not accepted. Just
Yes,
for the record, Mr.
Yes,
President.
they were submitted. We acknowledge the submission in writing, which is a practice that we have, and we accepted what we could. But again, we are happy to hear Her Honor state them. If she wants to explain, we will listen.
Thank you very much, good sponsor and good majority leader, Mr. President. So at least to state them for the record, just so that they are of record, yung ilang proposed amendments. And again, I apologize na hindi ko po ma-isa-cite in connection with the updated pagination and lines, except for one of these, which refers to a proposed amendment to Section 3. So on the old page 3, the old line 11, I had proposed to, after the word contracts...
Can Her
Yes,
Honor
Mr.
mention
President.
just section, and then is there a subsection, a letter M, letter L?
I'll try to complete that, Mr. President. I wonder, Mr. President, if it would be better to go back to my original intention to propose these at the end of the ongoing discussion on
Yes.
the committee amendments, so that on the individual amendments rather, so that
Yes,
I can, out of respect to the chair and the good
Yes.
gentleman from Valenzuela, make my proposed amendments for the record, complete.
Yes, the chair
Thank
would
you,
like
Mr.
to agree with
President.
the proposal of Senator Ontiveros, just to expedite the proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank
Senator
you, good
Risa.
colleagues.
Okay,
Senator Pia, you can now proceed.
thank you. The next amendment, Mr. President, is a new Section 16 on the powers and responsibilities of the Philippine Energy Research and Policy Institute. This is a Senator Risa Ontiveros proposal. On page 17, after line 18, insert a new Section 16, which shall read as Section 16, Powers and Responsibilities of the Philippine Energy Research and Policy Institute, parenthesis, per P, close parenthesis, pursuant to Republic Act Number 11572, otherwise known as the Philippine Energy Research and Policy Institute Act. The per P shall conduct research and development on renewable gas technologies, including production, storage, and distribution with support from the DOST and PNOC. Renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. We submit, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Still on Section 16, on page 18, delete line 1 to 8 and replace it with, the DOE shall be the lead agency in the development of aggregation in the country. The DOE shall determine and designate the aggregator and issue the applicable policies for the implementation thereof, adhering to the principles of economies of scale, as well as energy transparency, competitiveness, security, and reliability. The DOE may direct any of its attached agencies and instrumentalities to participate in aggregation activities. We submit, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, on
Yes,
page,
what is the
on-
pleasure
also on
of
the
Senator
same page,
Gatchalian?
Mr. President, and this is, Mr. President, a key amendment that we're introducing. On page 17, line 22 to 24.
Is that an anterior amendment, Senator Gatchalian?
Yes, and it's an anterior amendment, Mr. President.
Section 15.
So on line 22 to 24, delete the phrase organization for the purpose of this act. The PDNGI shall consist of the following sectors: supply, storage, and regasification, transmission, and distribution of natural gas, and replace it with the word aggregation, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
So, Mr. President, the proposal here is to specify clearly that this provision tackles the concept of aggregation, and later on we will move on into the concepts of aggregation, Mr. President.
A minute suspension because we already have a provision
Yes.
on this, so I have to compare what the difference is.
Se-
Mr. President.
Yes, session suspended.
Mr. President, we accept the amendment of Senator Gatchalian.
Thank
Okay,
you.
is there an objection? There being none, the amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the
Thank
good
you.
sponsor.
So we continue on to, the next amendment is Section 21, Authority to Obtain Information. On page 19, line 8, delete the word "to," and on the same page, line 9, replace Section 19 with Section 21. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
The next amendment is on Section 22. On page 19, line 14, delete the phrase "subject to Section 19 of this Act" and replace it with ERC and PCC. On the same page, line 18, after natural gas, insert the sentence, provided that it is consistent with the state's policy of ensuring energy security and consumer welfare. And on the same page, line 19, after the word supplier, insert the phrase "and aggregator." And on the same page, line 19, after the word fair, insert the phrase "and open." On the same page, line 24 to 25, delete the phrase "and optimal guaranteed utilization volumes for plants." And on page 20, line 4, delete the phrase "this includes requiring electricity supplier to source A," and delete the remaining lines 5 to 7. then replace it with this sentence. Pursuant thereto, the DOE shall formulate mechanisms that shall prescribe a mandated minimum percentage of the electricity demand of generation companies and/or distribution utilities to be sourced from indigenous natural gas. Such minimum percentage shall be reviewed and adjusted by the DOE as may be necessary. And on the same page, line 8, before the PDNGI facility, insert the phrase "subject to viability." We submit.
Is there an objection? There being none?
Subject to style, Mr. President, the provision appears to be too long.
Yes.
Perhaps
The amendment.
Yes,
the amendment-
exactly. It is one paragraph. Normally, when it's that long, I just say replace it and substitute it with this paragraph. So I asked my staff to show it so everybody can appreciate the change in that section. We can do that, Mr. President.
All right. Is there an objection? There being none, amendments is approved subject to style.
Mr. President, just a
Senator
clarification. Has a good sponsor amended page 18, line 1? 18, line 1?
We deleted line 1 to 8 on page 18
Page
and replaced it with the paragraph that I read into the record.
Mr. President, I have an amendment on page 18, Mr. President, lines on page 18, line 1, after the word agency, replace the word in.
Can I read or give you a copy, because I've deleted lines 1 to 8. It has already been accepted and
And the
replaced it
amendment
with
has
a
already been
paragraph.
approved.
So His Honor can look at the I'm very happy if His Honor still wants to amend it further, but I already made the proposed amendment.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just wait for the clean copy.
I can just give, I can hand it to you so we
Okay,
can go
Mr.
back to it anytime. Your staff has a copy, Your Honor, if you'd like to take a look at it and make the amendment based
Yep.
on the current wording.
Mr. President, this is the amendment with the word pursuant. I heard the word pursuant a while ago.
1 minute
No,
suspension,
that's
Mr. President.
different.
Session suspended.
The next item is on section 27 on cross-ownership. On page 21, line 9, delete uncompetitive and replace it with anti-competitive. And on the same page, line 11, delete section 13 and replace it with section 14. We submit, Mr. President.
Before we act on it, Senator Gatchalian, have you withdrew your motion to amend?
Well, Mr. President, we'll just wait for the clean copy so that we can take a look at that new provision that was inserted. And if need be, we can add
right.
some more provisions, if need be, Mr.
Okay, there's a
President.
pending motion by Senator Cayetano. Is there any objection?
19, no?
There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, I have an anterior amendment, Mr. President. On page 19, after the word DOE, in page 19, in line 14, okay na ba yan? Okay na yan? Okay. On page 19, line 18, after the phrase,
Line 18 or line 14?
line 18.
18.
Page 19, line 18, after the phrase "by gas-fired power plants shall," insert the phrase "undergo competitive bidding to ensure least cost fuel in line with Republic Act Number 9136, and whenever indigenous gas price is equal to or lower than imported natural gas, then indigenous gas shall." I so move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I need a moment to digest the amendment, Mr. President.
You want a minute
We can
suspension?
suspend for a minute, Mr. President.
Mr. President, perhaps the proponent can read the proposed amendment starting from line 17 in its entirety, Mr. President.
Senator Gatchalian, you wish to read in the Your amendment?
Yes,
beginning
Mr.
with line
President.
17?
I'll read the entire proposed paragraph, Mr. President. Procurement and utilization of natural gas, including without limitation by gas-fired power plants, shall undergo competitive bidding to ensure least cost fuel in line with Republic Act Number 9136, and whenever indigenous natural gas price is equal to or lower than imported natural gas, then indigenous natural gas shall be prioritized. An indigenous natural gas supplier shall provide fair access to its natural gas supply in a non-discriminatory and transparent manner through physical supply, and so on, Mr. President.
Okay, we will just wait for the,
No, I'm ready, Mr. President. I'm
Yeah.
ready to respond.
yes, please.
Mr. President, as this representation has been explaining, the purpose of aggregation is really to ensure energy security, and I liken it to the rice supply. Pag wala ho tayong sariling rice supply, we're dependent on foreigners. We're dependent
Imports.
on imports. And wala tayong mapapakain sa tao, sa mga kababayan natin pagka nagkagera yung mga supplier natin o magalit sila sa atin. So we always want to ensure, and that is why we have endless debates also on the importance of food security, starting with rice. So it is the same thing with energy, Mr. President. As I have been explaining since I started defending this bill, the demands, our energy demand will continue to increase. This is worldwide. Yun nga po, kakagaling ko lang sa isang conference, and worldwide, energy demands will increase. Ang example nga binibigay ko po sa ating lahat, kasi yung mga kaedad ko, maaalala nyo to, natuto ako magbukas ng delata, dipihit yung can opener. Ngayon yung can opener, kailangan pa di baterya. Tapos, lumaki din akong paypay. Ngayon, pag lumalabas ako, yung mga tao, puro battery-operated na yung handheld na paypay. So, everything now is powered. That's just the way we roll nowadays, Mr. President. So, the energy supply will be very much in demand. Energy will be very much in demand. And the only way we can assure our people of a steady energy supply, and that means reliable, yung hindi pa brown out, at yung presyo, medyo kontrolado natin, is may sarili tayong supply. I don't think it is that difficult to understand that kung may sarili kang supply, okay ka. So on that note, again, a learning I had during my recent conference in energy, ang dami ng bansang gumagawa ng aggregation. Kasi nga, kukunin nila yung supply ng iba-iba, kasi parang ano ho to parang yung futures market, yung nagbibid ho dun sa mga grain, sa mga stocks, agricultural products, very common in other countries. So ganun din yung gas. People, the supply will be bidded out. Yung gas company, yung Genco, magbibid siya for his supply 20 years ho yan. 20 years. So right now, pag bid niya, tingin niya ito yung okay na presyo, magbibid siya for 20 years. Wala akong bumibili ng gas na patingi-tingi. Meron, pero ba't nyo gagawin yun? That's very vulnerable if you're going to just bid for your supply for this month, this quarter. You buy wholesale and you buy long-term. That's how it's done. So the purpose of aggregation now is to ensure that may market ang indigenous supply natin. I will put on the screen again the chart that shows that historically, lagi namang mababa. When I say lagi, let me correct that. Predominantly, mababa naman ang presyo. Yan ho yung color blue. Yan ang presyo ng indigenous gas natin. The blue line. Kung ako ho ay runner, kayang-kaya kong takbuhin yan. Dire-diretso lang yan. Tingnan nyo naman yung color red. Ang tindi ng ups and downs. That is the imported supply. That is data from 2010 to 2024, dear colleagues. So I'm not inventing this. This is historical data. So I will go back. What we are trying to do here in the natural gas bill is to promote exploration and development of our indigenous natural gas. And for us to promote it, we want to make it inviting to investors. Open to all po to, kahit sino pong investor na may ganyang kakayanan, may ganyang kapasidad at may ganyan ding resources para mag-invest ng indigenous gas. They can come and invest so that tayo naman magkaroon tayo ng security of energy because we have our own indigenous natural gas. So, in this specific provision that His Honor is would like to amend, hindi ho natin matatanggap yan because precisely we need to ensure na may buyers, bibili ng mga generation company ang ating indigenous natural gas. Yes, there are slight changes once in a while, pero very minimal po siya. And again, I go back to the comparison with rice. Di syempre, unahin natin ibenta yung sariling atin, yun munang gagamitin natin. So, with all due respect to our colleague, that amendment cannot be accepted.
Mr. President, let me just explain my amendment, Mr. President. And thank you for the explanation. Mr. President, this provision deals with procurement and utilization of natural gas. And in the proposal, and let me just read it, procurement and utilization of natural gas, including without limitation by gas-fired power plant, shall be prioritized over imported natural gas, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, without any bidding, we don't know what prices this prioritization will be charged to our consumers, Mr. President. So all we request is for a bidding to be conducted so that consumers will be assured that the best possible price will be passed on to them. And as an added come on, if the indigenous gas is equal or below, then they will be prioritized. So, Mr. President, what we are proposing here is to have that competitive bidding so all of us will know what prices are power plants buying in terms of gas supply, Mr. President. So that is the proposal. Without this, Mr. President, then the indigenous gas suppliers can charge any price. No, they can charge, there's no restriction whatsoever in terms of pricing. And we have to remember that this gas price will be passed on all the way to the end consumer, Mr. President. So we're just protecting the consumers in this proposal, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we already have a provision in the bill that provides, specifically it says, provided that it is consistent with the state's policy of ensuring energy security and consumer welfare. I've also repeated this a number of times during the period of interpellation because it is our concern that the consumers get the best possible prices. So, hindi naman balak ng ating regulatory agency na mataas yung presyo na makakarating sa mga consumers. Pero ang gusto natin, mabalanse natin yung energy security and consumer welfare. So, that is the reason for we believe that this provision is sufficient to guard the consumers' rights, Mr. President.
Mr. President, once again, thank you for the explanation. Mr. President, we saw the provision on consumer welfare, but consumer welfare is a very wide aspect, Mr. President. You can talk about service, you can talk about delivery of electricity. Pricing is just an aspect of consumer welfare, Mr. President. So to make it narrow, to make sure that from step one, because this is actually step one, Mr. President, this is actually where electricity will begin, when power plants purchase feedstock or purchase natural gas, Mr. President. So we just want to make sure that whenever power plants purchase natural gas, it will be competitive, whether it's indigenous or imported LNG. It will be competitive, Mr. President. But again, as an added support for indigenous gas, if ever their pricing is low, and as demonstrated in the slide that historically they have been lower than imported LNG, then they will get the priority. And that's an assurance that's embedded in the law, Mr. President. So it's just a price assurance or a price discovery mechanism so that consumers will be confident that they are getting the best price, Mr. President.
Mr. President, just a clarification while we are in a lull moment. Mr. President, may we know the importance from the proponent, the importance of adding the word quote-unquote bidding and the lack of mention of it? What will happen?
Well, Mr. President, if you read the original provision, and let me just read it again, the procurement and utilization of indigenous natural gas, including without limitation by gas-fired power plants, shall be prioritized over imported natural gas, Mr. President. So, regardless of the price, they will be prioritized. And actually, in some cases, Mr. President, and in the later months, indigenous gas has actually, in some cases, has actually increased its price more than imported LNG, Mr. President. So, and that will be passed on to our consumers. Again, this is a step one. When power plants buy natural gas, eventually they will convert that into electricity and it will be passed on to consumers, Mr. President. So we just want to have an assurance that in the step one, in the first step, and we all know electricity is a multi-step industry. In the first step, there's already price discovery and bidding, Mr. President. So that's the proposal.
But Mr. President, we were just shown a chart na mababa yung sa blue, mababa lagi yung indigenous.
Then, Mr. President, if that is the case, then indigenous gas will always win.
That is
And
the
they
case.
will be, and they should be confident enough that the bidding, even if there is a bidding or price discovery mechanism, they will win, Mr. President. But the important aspect there is bidding. There is price discovery. There is a way for us to see that this is indeed the best price that the power plants bought.
So it has to be placed there to ensure that the price discovery mechanism would indeed benefit the consumers. Is that
Correct, Mr. President.
That's correct?
That's correct, Mr.
Mr. President, can I ask for a minute suspension?
Before the suspension, can I just read the provision into the record?
Yes, please proceed.
There is no desire to hide anything from the consumers. The provision, Section 23, starts, the statement is the procurement, delivery, and pricing of natural gas from indigenous production facilities or from importation to the PDNGI, so both yan, shall be transparent and secure. Nandiyan na ho yan. If necessary, the DOE, ERC, and PCC shall require the suppliers to submit relevant information pertaining to supply contracting, procurement, pricing. It is stated there, Your Honors, pricing and distribution scheme to users for the purpose of monitoring. Again, Mr. President, wala na tayong kailangan i-debate kasi nga, this is 14 years, di ba? So, confident naman tayo na over and above, mababa naman ang presyo ng indigenous gas. But we know how the market works. Like I said, how many years wala na tayong exploration? You know, I attended this conference. It's so embarrassing. The last parang heyday of exploration was in the 70s. Tapos pababa ang ating investment in exploration of natural gas. Now we have this opportunity to announce to the world that we are open to exploring and developing natural gas. So this is part of our billboard, this is part of our messaging that indigenous natural gas will have buyers in the Philippines. Sinisigurado natin para naman alam ng mga investors may bibili niyan. And nakikita naman dito na hindi naman pwedeng basta-basta pataasin yung presyo dahil hindi naman papayag ang ating regulatory agencies na magbenta sa mga Pilipino ng mas mataas na presyo, yung natural gas na galing sa atin mismo. So, it speaks for itself, Mr. President, and we reject the amendment with all due respect.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. President. But, Mr.
Mr.
President,
I requested for a minute suspension.
You want a minute suspension?
Yes.
Okay, session suspended.
President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2793.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution 1209, This is the resolution congratulating and commending the Senate Sentinels, the champion team of this chamber. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Consideration of proposed Senate Resolution number 1209 is now in order. The Secretary is directed to read the title of the resolution.
Resolution congratulating and commending the Senate Sentinels for winning its second consecutive championship at the UNTV Cup Executive Face-Off.
Mr. President, Mr. President, I ask for a minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
President, Senator Bongo will deliver a sponsorship speech. The Senate President would like to insert into the records his sponsorship speech, Mr. President, but let me add a short manifestation, Mr. President, just for the record. We are gathered here to give support and recognition to our own Senate basketball team, Sentinels basketball team, with several athletes coming from this chamber, Senator Joel Villanueva, Senator Bongo, and the Department of Education Secretary as the team captain, if I'm not mistaken, and the Senate President Pro Tem as the chief sponsor and cheerleader cum manager of the said team, Mr.
I was not informed, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, this is not just a victory for the Senate. It is not just a recognition for all our legislator athletes, but it is the testament to the spirit, dedication, and teamwork that define this team, and indeed all of us here in the Senate. So our team, the Senate Sentinel, faced formidable opponents, and we have Senator Joel Villanueva doing some combination of legislative and athletic work with grueling practices and relentless pressure in competition, Mr. President. But as they just do in the legislative halls, they meet every challenge with resilience, determination, and unwavering commitment to excellence. Kaya po, Mr. President, atin po sigurong hindi lang palakpakan, kung hindi bigyan ng walang tigil na pagsaludo ang ating mga kasama sa Senado, kabilang po ang mga empleyado ng Senado na bahagi ng team na ito. They have shown that success comes not from individual talent alone, but from unity, teamwork, and shared passion. Kaya, Mr. President, allow me to be a co-sponsor likewise of Senate Resolution number 1209, congratulating and commending the Senate Sentinels. Mr. President, Senator Bongo, the main sponsor, would like to deliver his sponsorship speech as well. I move that he be recognized.
Senator Bongo is recognized.
Mr. President, as chairman of the Committee on Sports, it is with great pride and honor, and I co-sponsor the resolution commending and congratulating the Senate Sentinels for winning its historic back-to-back championships in the UNTV Cup Executive Face-Off. First time po ito na back-to-back sa Executive Face-Off. Mr. President, the UNTV Cup Executive Face-Off is more than just a game of basketball. It is an annual charity league in the Philippines where government agencies come together not just to compete in the sport of basketball, but also to contribute in noble causes. Through this league, we show the government service extends beyond our usual duties as it reaches to our communities, providing support and hope to those in need. Maraming salamat po sa UNTV, kay Sir Daniel Rason, at sa lahat po ng organizers. I would like to congratulate our team, the Senate Sentinels, which is composed of senators, Senate staff, and employees for defeating the AFP Cavaliers with an impressive score of 74 to 62, led by players like Senator Joel Villanueva. former Senator and now Secretary Sani Angara. And team members, panoorin muna natin, sandali. Yan.
Senado, Senator Angara has it. Angara, nice move! And the Senator is trying to force it. Senator Villanueva finally got it! 5 points here.
Sandali.
Open the court into a 3-ball. Senator Bongo with 2 3-point baskets. Like just like that. 17-point lead.
Ang saya oh, daming fans. And of course, mga team members including Director General Ronald Golding, magre-retire na po ito. Salamat po sa iyong serbisyo and salamat sa back-to-back natin. Sentro yan. And of course, the triggerman, Deputy Secgen Joey Flaminiano. Director Albert San Cruz. Director Renato Sison Jr. Attorney Patrick Parawan. Tayo. Attorney Volts Robles. Supportive yung wife niya. Parating nandun. Renante Langit Jr. Tayo. Jose Reynaldo Ramos. Duty. Jonel Sanggalang. Benjamin Navea. Naging best player to once. Javier Lais. Warren Tan, magre-retire na rin. Christian Andaya. Reynaldo Malaga Jr. Yan, MVP yan. Romel Evaristo. Yan, another MVP yan. Mrs. ni Councilor Evaristo. Attorney Steven Pastor. And Harley Nang, the Senate Sentinels had a sweeping victory and remain undefeated throughout the tournament due to the tireless efforts of our teammates. Lahat po ay nagpakita ng dedikasyon sa bawat training at buong puso na lumaban sa bawat laro. Each one of them played their hearts out to win this second championship. At syempre po, huwag nating kalimutan at hindi natin makakamit ang tagumpay na ito without the guidance of our head coach Mike Fermin, assistant coach Carlos Fermin, assistant coach Alex Barrera, conditioning coach Dante Diwa Tangco, and Reynold Benalayo. Further, would like to appreciate the efforts of the support staff who have had contributed significantly to this success. Of course, isa-isahin ko rin pong pasalamatan. Present yan parate. Michelle Torres, Rhea Joy La Dublan, Jeffrey Magtoto, Mark Rendal, and Mateo Sarco Jr., along with the medical staff who made sure that we are all equipped and fit to play. May dala pang mga ice to parate. Doktora Laila Celino, Bianca Marie Dato, Richard Dino, and Anthony Abelita. At nagpapasalamat rin po tayo sa mga Senate offices na tumulong financially para sa pangangailangan ng team at sa mga kasama natin dito sa Senado. Maraming salamat po sa inyo. At Senate President Pro Tempore, alam kong galante po kayo. And of course, Senate Majority Floor Leader Tol Tolentino, another galante. Senate Minority Leader Senator Coco. Salamat. Senator Risa, Senator Win, Senator Nancy. Sa lahat na nandito sa floor ngayon. Salamat po. With this victory, 1 million pesos prize money will be donated to 3 deserving organizations. Tahanang Walang Hagdanan Incorporated, Foundation Incorporated and Conservance Philippines, PH. This financial support will benefit these organizations that serve individuals or persons with disabilities, children with cancer, and other vulnerable communities. Mr. President, isa pong karangalan ang mapabilang sa Senate Sentinels. I would like to give credit to my teammates sa galing, husay, sportsmanship, and camaraderie na kanilang pinamalas all throughout the tournament. Sipag po, sobrang sipag po ng mga kasamahan natin sa pagpapractice. Kahit kami ni Senator Joel, medyo hirap kaming sumali sa mga practice dahil sa trabaho natin dito. Sila po'y present always. Ang sarap po ng pakiramdam, lalong-lalo na po sa mga karamihan po sa crowd ay sumusuporta sa ating team, Senate Sentinels. Gusto ko rin pong bigyang pagpupugay ang ating mga naging katunggali sa tournament na ito, AFP Cavaliers, GSIS Furies, OP Executives, SSS Kabalikat Pension Boosters, COMELEC Fast Trackers, DOJ Beacons Executives, Ombudsman Graph Busters, Judiciary Magis, and DFA Diplomats. Lastly, nagpapasalamat po ako sa organizers ng UNTV Cup Executive Face-Off sa pangunguna ni Kuya Daniel Rason at Commissioner Atoy Ko, Deputy Commissioner Ed Cordero. Sa pamamagitan ng mga sports tournament kagaya nito, mas maengganyo po ang ating mga kababayan na bigyan ng importansya ang sports. Malaking relief po sa amin, sa atin, sa mga nagtatrabaho sa gobyerno na makapag-ensayo at makapaglaro po sa ganitong torneo. Ang tagumpay po na ito ay para sa buong Senado, para sa ating mga kababayan at sa lahat ng chosen beneficiaries. Mabuhay po ang Senate Sentinels at mabuhay po ang buong Senado.
Thank you, one of the franchise players of Senate Sentinel, Senator Bongo.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
Senator Joel Villanueva, a member likewise of the team and the most improved MVP. Not the MVP.
Most improved MVP pa. Ha?
Would like to deliver
I have
a-
yet to hear that kind of title, Mr. President.
Most improved.
May we know
MVP.
if the presiding officer is aware of that title?
No, I have never heard of it.
So it's really an honor to give an accolade such as those words which are not tongue twisters but really deserving of our good colleague here. Who would like, Senator Joel Villanueva would like to deliver a manifestation of appreciation.
Thank you very much,
Senator
Mr. President.
Villanueva,
Thank you.
recognized.
Thank you, Majority Leader, especially for that out-of-this-world title given to this representation. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, it has been my great honor and pride to play alongside my fellow senators, Senator Bongo and Senator, now Secretary Sani Angara, in the UNTV Cup Executive Face-Off. Ginoong Pangulo, ito ho ang ikalawang sunod na panalo ng Senado sa UNTV Cup Executive Face-Off at ito po ay gumuhit ng kasaysayan sa mundo ng Liga ng Basketball ng UNTV Executive Face-Off dahil wala pa pong koponan sa ligang ito ang naka-back-to-back championship, Mr. President. Kaya po lubos po tayong nagpapasalamat at nagbibigay pugay sa ating koponan dito sa Senado. Hindi po matatawaran ang galing, talento at puso na ipinamalas ng bawat miyembro ng koponan ng Senado para po makamit itong kampyonatong ito. Kahit busy po sa kanilang mga trabaho, naglalaan po ang bawat isa sa atin, maging kami po ni Senator Bongo at Senator Angara ng oras para makapag-practice. Hayaan nyo, Ginoong Pangulo, na banggitin ko lang po ang mga miyembro ng koponan ng Senate Sentinels. Unahin ko po yung magre-retire. Last dance niya po ito, Mr. President. Ang Director General ng SEPO, si Ronald Golding. Ang ating pong doktor ng Senado, ang lahat po na dito sa Senate, lumalapit dito. At pinakamabait na doktor sa ating pong gobyerno, si Dr. Renato Sison Jr. Mula po sa LCMS, si Attorney Albert Cruz. Mula po sa office ni Senator Jinggoy Estrada, na most likely magbibigyan ng bahay at lupa sa San Juan, si Attorney Patrick Parawan. Mula po sa office ni Senator Tulfo, si Director Jonel Sanggalang. Mula po sa office ni Senator Angara, si Reynaldo Malaga. Mula po sa office ni Senator Lapid, na bibigyan ng kalahating bala, si Benjamin Navea. Mula po sa Library Service, si Christian Andaya. Mula po sa OSA, ang retiring na nakikita po natin dito sa gilid ng session hall palagi. Ang sentro po at matagal nang naglaro sa Senate Sentinels, walang iba kung hindi si Warren Tan. Mula po sa office din ni Senator Angara, si Javier Lais. Mula po sa office ni Senator Mark Villar, si Attorney Mark Steven Pastor. Mula po sa office ni Senator Revilla, ang aming MVP din, si Romel Evaristo. Meron din pong inilaan si Senator Revilla na bahay at lupa sa Bacoor. Kaya po mag-e-enjoy si Konsehala at dating Vice Mayor ng Bacoor, na asawa po na ating kasama si Romel. Mr. President, mula din po sa OSAA, si Jose Reynaldo Ramos, ang ating pong Deputy Secretary General ng Commission on Appointments, ang aming triggerman, si, muntik ako nang sabihin, Senador, Joey Flaminiano. At syempre, yung ating mga kasamahan sa medical team, si Dr. Laila, si Bianca, si Richard Dino ng MDB, at syempre, yung pinakamahalaga po sa akin, yung physical therapist ng Senado, Mr. President, walang iba kundi si Anthony Abilita. Of course, si Rhea and Michelle, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Mr. President, few weeks before the championship game, alam nyo naman ho yung pinagdaanan natin. Pinagbawalan po tayo ng doktor na maglaro, pero buti na lang nandyan po si Anthony para makalaro pa rin ho tayo. At gusto nating batiin din ang miyembro ng Senado na kasama sa Mythical 5 na magdadagdag ng bonus. Walang iba kundi si Senator Christopher Bongo. Ayan po. Si Senator Bato daw po ay nasabihan lang na magdo-donate, umalis na. Ayun po. Nagbabalik. May dalang duffel bag. Mr. President, nagpapasalamat din po tayo sa ating coach, ang ating head coach, Mike Fermin, assistant coach, si Tata Fermin, sa ating pong mga kasamahan na talagang nagsakripisyo para maging matagumpay ang Senate Sentinels. Of course, kay Kuya Daniel Razon ng UNTV Cup for this very impressive hosting of the games. Likewise, would like to congratulate and commend the AFP Cavaliers for giving us a good fight. Mr. President, last but not the least, may I just point out that the cash prize of 1 million pesos will benefit Tahanang Walang Hagdanan, a rehabilitation and skills training center which aims to uplift the lives of persons with disability. The Kite Foundation, whose goals are to improve the quality of life of hospitalized children with cancer and other chronic illnesses. And Cancervants Philippines, an organization advocating for child cancer awareness. Last but not the least, Mr. President, we'd like to thank the leadership of the Senate, kay Senate President Chis Escudero, kay Senate President Pro Temp Jinggoy Estrada, kay Majority Leader Francis Tolentino for your unwavering support, and the whole Senate community for cheering and praying for us. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Mabuhay ang Senate Sentinels. Mabuhay po ang Senado. At muli, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Joel. Senator Joel, meron lang ako isang katanungan. Because I have been scouting players all over the Philippines. Meron ba ako makakuha dyan para sa San Juan Knights?
Depende daw po yan sa negosasyon, sabi ni Senator Bongo. Si Senator Bongo and this representation will play for San Juan pro bono, Mr. President.
All right.
I already mentioned Mythical 5, Mr. President. I think San Juan Knights need the services of Senator Bongo.
You have to go to the procedure also. You have to...
There's no
have
VIP
tryouts.
treatment.
There's no
I
VIP
agree.
treatment.
I agree, Mr. President. You have to try out daw. Thank you.
Anyway, Majority Floor Leader, the chair would also like to insert the records, his sponsorship speech.
Thank you to our very generous Senate President pro tempore. Mr. President,
Wala pa ako sinasabi, ah.
Mr. President, no member wishes to interpolate or propose amendments to the measure. I move that we adopt proposed Senate Resolution 1209, subject to style. Mr. President, so move.
Is there an objection? There being none, proposed Senate Resolution number 1209, subject to style is hereby.
Mr. President, all members likewise of this chamber present here should be made co-authors of this resolution. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move for a minute suspension to enable the winning team as well as the members of the Mythical Five, the most improved MVP, to join you in the rostrum for a short picture taking, Mr. President.
Maybe you can wait for the Senate President to go down to... Andyan. Session suspended. Tatago.
Mr. President, I move to resume the period of individual amendments with Senator Pia Cayetano as the main sponsor and the September 25, 2024 clean copy of the bill as the working draft with Senator Gatchalian as the interpolator. I move that they be recognized, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Senator Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, may I propose to the good sponsor to just park Section 22 for now? We gave our proposals. However, there are still some discussions whether to accept or how to tweak that proposal, Mr. President. And I have succeeding proposals on Section 22 as well. And admittedly, Section 22 is the core of this bill, the meat of this bill, Mr. President. So if a good sponsor will allow, we can park this for now so that we can think about it. We can also come up with compromises and counter proposals, Mr. President.
Mr. President, earlier before we suspended, we regretfully delivered our response that we were rejecting the amendment of His Honor. But of course, in the interest of still finding a compromise, we had a fairly lengthy discussion. And unfortunately, Mr. President, as His Honor knows, this is the heart and soul of the bill. And this representation has made lengthy explanation, including the chart that we showed on the screen about how for the past 14 years, the price of indigenous natural gas has been extremely competitive. It has mostly been on the low side. We reiterated the provisions that are currently in the bill, and it is our position that this is necessary because we want to really promote indigenous natural gas, and the only way we can do that is to really ensure that when we develop the industry, there will be buyers for indigenous natural gas. And this is not a scenario, this is not something we're inventing. Aggregation is very common in many countries, and doing this is really the answer to our ensuring energy security for the country, Mr. President. So that is our position. If His Honor at the end of all this still has additional proposal, it is my duty to always listen to my colleagues, but for now, this is the response, and we are rejecting that proposal, unfortunately.
Thank you for the reply, Mr. President. And Mr. President, I heard the arguments of the good sponsor, Mr. President, and if she will allow, we can table this for now, the entire Section 22, and I will submit to her. Actually, I've already submitted to her our proposal, but we can also submit some counter proposals, and just to give us some time to think, Mr. President, and also not to belabor the point, Mr. President.
Are we going to deliberate it after all the
Well, as far as
amendments?
this representation is concerned, there is no counter proposal coming from us. It has already been rejected. So if His Honor wants to work on it, of course, I will entertain, but I've officially rejected the amendment already, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, if that is the case, Mr. President, unfortunately, I am of the opinion that this is a very important proposal to make sure that we can deliver the lowest price to our consumers. Mr. President, we took a look at, personally, I took a look at the entire repercussions of this proposal, Mr. President, and this provision will impact our consumers directly. So we thought about this and we carefully analyzed the provision in this bill, Mr. President. Unfortunately, our proposal is to have transparency from the onset so that we can assure our consumers, we can tell them that they will get the lowest price possible, Mr. President.
Well, just to respond, but I've already pointed it out, the word transparent is very clear in the opening sentence of this section. So in terms of assuring customers of transparency, nandiyan na po yun. And anyway, I think I've belabored the point,
Yeah.
Mr. President. I'd like to move on.
Mr. President, if so we can, if the good sponsor will allow, I have succeeding amendments, Mr. President, that is related to the first amendment so that we can clearly see the entire picture. May I propose that amendment? And if the good sponsor still feels that that amendment is unacceptable, then we can vote on the entire amendment, Mr. President, because it's all interconnected so that I will not make one amendment after the other, if the good sponsor will allow that.
May I know from the sponsor, what page did we finish your last amendment?
My last amendment, Mr. President, is on page 21. I think that's the last one I read. Page 21, the last one I read, which was already approved.
Mr. President, my amendment is on page 19,
So
Line
this is an
18.
Anterior amendment?
anterior amendment, Mr. President.
All right, please proceed.
Mr. President, I'll read my other amendments because it's all interconnected. And we can decide on that later on. On page 19, in the same line 18, delete the phrase over imported natural gas. On the same page, in line 20, after the word supply, delete the word administrative. On the same page, in line 21, delete the phrase or any other arrangement allowed by DOE. On the same page, delete the paragraphs from lines 22 to 25. And on page 20, these are all interrelated, Mr. President. On page 20, on page 20, line 2, before the word indigenous, insert the phrase power from. On the same page, line 2, replace the phrase in the generation, transmission, distribution, and supply of power with the phrase over power from the other conventional energy sources whenever the price of power from indigenous gas is equal to or lower than power from conventional energy sources. And on the same page, in lines 4 to 7, delete the phrase, this includes requiring electricity suppliers to source a portion of their energy supply from power plants that use indigenous natural gas and determining the appropriate minimum percentage of the power generation mix that should be supplied by natural gas power plants that use indigenous natural gas. So those are my amendments, Mr. President, on Section 22, Mr. President. And it's all interconnected, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. We reject those amendments. The provision that we have approved is the provision that is acceptable to this committee, and unfortunately, NDOE, in consistent with our objective of pursuing energy security and the best prices for the consumers, Mr. President. We feel that the provision we have is sufficient to cover consumer welfare and competitive prices, which I know is the goal of His Honor, Mr. President.
Senator Win.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is I have a pending appeal to the good sponsor on accepting the several amendments that I proposed earlier on Section 22. I've conferred with good Senate President, and he mentioned that I make my appeal tomorrow morning, or tomorrow during the session, Mr. President. So we
So you
can
withdraw
move
your
on
appeal?
to the next provision
All right.
without prejudice to the appeal that I will be making to the body.
All right. Senator Pia, you have the floor.
Yes, noted, noted.
Thank you,
So,
thank you,
yeah.
thank you, Senator Pia, thank you.
Does His Honor have any amendment before Section 21? Because otherwise I'll proceed with page 21.
Page 20. Page 21. We have on page 21, Mr. President. On page 21, line 9, after the phrase act, insert the.
Before His Honor proceeds, my last amendment was, I deleted, did you take note of that, just so your amendment takes that into consideration? Deleted uncompetitive and replaced it with anti-competitive.
That's on line 9, Mr. President.
Line 9,
Sponsor.
yes.
Let me just look at the copy. Okay, Mr. President. Okay. Mr. President, this is a different proposal, Mr. President, and with the permission of
Okay,
the good
please proceed.
sponsor. Yeah, let me just propose it. In line 9, after the phrase acts, insert the phrase provided that the separate business entities shall be established for each PDNG facility or activity, provided further that owners and operators of LNG storage and regasification terminals shall be prohibited from owning an interest in TPA conventional transportation system and vice versa. So move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
Can we get the rationale of His Honor?
Well, Mr. President, it's by allowing the LNG owners of storage and regasification, and at the same time, owners of the pipelines, the conventional transportation systems. The pipelines will only be one, just like NGCP, that it's only one. But if it owns the source of the LNG, then obviously he has the power, or that entity has the power now to dispatch LNG from his own assets or from his own storage and regasification terminals. That's why in the case of power, NGCP is prohibited from owning power plants and also distribution utilities because it's a natural monopoly. And at the same time, it's also the system operator. It traffics where supply and demand should meet. So in this case, we're also applying the same concept to pipelines, or what we call here conventional transportation systems, Mr. President. So that's the rationale, Mr. President.
Noted. I mean, it's suspension. I just have to study this.
Session suspended for a minute.
Mr. President, there's also a first proviso, Mr. President, and the first proviso is simple. The owners of PDNG facility and activity will create a separate business entities And the reason for that, Mr. President, so that they cannot commingle pricing, as well as it's easier to unbundle charging mechanisms, Mr. President, because if it's one and the same, then it's very difficult to unbundle pricing, Mr. President. So what we requested from the good sponsor is to mandate entities to create separate business entities for different units so that pricing will be much easier to unbundle and to analyze, Mr. President. So that's the first.
I have a question, Mr. President. Will these separate business entities also be prohibited from owning an interest in the transportation system if the other separate business entity owns the storage and regasification terminal?
Yes, that's the intention, Mr. President.
Okay, so I'm trying to study this very carefully, and this is our scenario. We are a very our natural gas industry is, how do you put it? It's in the infancy stage. So currently there is a regasification and storage terminal being built. And so if we now will pass this, then this investor in the storage and regasification has to wait until an investor decides to build a transportation facility. It will delay these projects, Mr. President, because we are really in the infancy stage. I understand what His Honor is trying to prevent. You know, we don't want a monopoly, that no one can come in because there's only one player. But we're in the infancy stage, and the transportation is almost like an accessory to the storage business, because they'll have to find other investors, and then, you know, it's not as if we have so many people investing in this. There's a line for people to invest. There's so many people who want to. That's not our situation right now. So perhaps this proposal may be ripe in a decade or two, but right now, even the existing storage storage and regasification plant, what will they do if we ban them from investing in their distribution? I don't know how we would proceed, Mr. President.
Yeah. Mr. President, how about the first proviso that we propose, the creation of separate business entities? That goes with the first sentence, Mr. President.
Concern is the price transparency. Perhaps we can improve the language on that note, because that's what His Honor was explaining
Yes, Mr. President,
earlier.
because if it's one entity, for example, you have the pipelines and, let's say, the storage facilities as one entity, it's very difficult now to unbundle the rates, because obviously everything will be put together in one rate, and it's very difficult now to promote competitiveness or competition in that industry, because it's all bundled. It's very hard to analyze. That's why in the power sector, there's also a mandate to unbundle rates so that it's easy to analyze. But in this case, the first proviso allows common ownership. It's just you have to set up a separate business entity, Mr. President. So that is the proposal.
Okay. Mr. President, I'll bring His Honor's attention back to the provision that we were debating for quite some time earlier today, entitled Natural Gas Supply. It says there that if necessary, the DOE, ERC, and PCC shall require the suppliers to submit relevant information pertaining to supply contracting, procurement, pricing, and distribution scheme to users for purpose of monitoring. So this is where the unbundling can probably be elaborated on, if His Honor would like to make a proposal there. because if that is the intention, no, that's why I appreciate His Honor explaining the rationale, because I'm also trying to find where we can include that. I don't know if it is necessary for them to have separate business entities. In my mind, those are corporate options. They might want to run as one entity for various reasons, administrative, for tax purposes. I don't know. I can't give an answer as to, I cannot offhand say that I cannot accept that amendment just because there may be repercussions that, or intrusions on the rights of these corporate owners. But I do accept His Honor's concern on the unbundling, and maybe that could be tackled in some other provision or with some other language.
Mr. President, if the good sponsor thinks that the power that we incorporated in Section 2 to DOE, and then we expanded it to ERC, then PCC, for purposes of monitoring, in her Honor's knowledge, is this enough to mandate the entities to unbundle? Because that is actually the intention of this is to unbundle through separate business entities. No? Because if you have separate business entities, you have to file different documents. So if that is the suggestion of the good sponsor, that Section 22 can deal with the mandate of unbundling, I think this representation can take a look at that position.
I was getting the opinion on this also with DOE, and they agree that it is sufficient for purpose of requiring unbundling, Mr. President.
All right. If that's the case, Mr. President, I'm withdrawing the amendment,
Thank
Mr.
you.
President,
Thank you.
just to put that on record that there's already sufficient powers to mandate entities to unbundle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does His Honor have anything more before page 21?
No more, Mr. President.
Okay, so I'll proceed with my amendment on page 20, this is section 28 on own use. On page 21, line 19, after the phrase approved by the DOE, insert a new sentence which shall read as, the DOE's approval shall specify the standards and limitations thereof. We submit.
Any objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
Mr. President, I have an anterior amendment on page 26, Mr. President.
We're not yet there. We're on page 21.
We're still on page 21.
Sorry, Mr. President. Sorry,
Sorry,
Mr.
I think
President.
Are
you
you
got
with
confused
us?
because I said section 28.
Sorry, Mr. President.
So my next is still page 22 and then page 23. So pwede ka muna umupo, Mr. President, Mr. Sponsor.
Ay, wala na yan.
On page
Wala na ngayon.
22, line 6, after DOE,
You remove that.
insert a new sentence which shall read as, the DOE's approval shall specify the standards and limitations thereof. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
Thank you. The next one, Mr. President, is on page 23, line 10. Delete the phrase, the TPA permit holder of the PDNGI facility shall have the authority to release and market the same, and replace it with, the DOE shall have the authority to direct the release of the same. We submit, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
And on the same page, delete line 12 to 14 and replace it with, the procedure and criteria for the release shall be governed by the TPA code. We submit.
Any objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next one is on page 24, after line 11, insert a new section which shall read as follows. Section 35, Safety Standards. The DOE, in collaboration with the NREB and PNOC, shall develop and implement safety standards of natural gas, including renewable gases, in order to address their unique properties and risks. This is an amendment of Senator Hontiveros. We submit and ask that the succeeding sections are renumbered accordingly.
Any objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. My next one is on page 26, line 4. Does the gentleman from Valenzuela have something before that? Page
Yes, Mr.
26,
President.
Line 4, yes?
Line 4, Mr. President. Delete, at section 26, line 4, delete the word "and" after the semicolon. So move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
Well, we accept in principle, it's just the word "and," and I also have that amendment, so we
Okay.
accept that.
Okay. Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, I have more amendments on the same page. On the same page, after line 4, insert the following subsections and renumber the remaining subsections accordingly. Letter L, establish and maintain a decommissioning fund at the start of the PDNGI facility operation to be utilized for its decommissioning. Letter M, unbundle and make available to the public their unbundled rates and fees if applicable. Letter N, not engage in any anti-competitive behavior. Semicolon N. I so move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
Mr. President, I need a minute suspension to study the matter. Thank you.
Session suspended.
On the first letter, what was that, L, no? The establishment of a decommissioning fund. The only reason we did not accept that in the written submission is because it is already required by DNR. But we are very happy, subject to style, to say something to that effect. That
Okay, Mr. President.
as provided by, I don't know if it's a DNR regulation or.
Yeah, we can cite the regulation,
Yeah,
Mr. President.
we
We
can.
can
Okay.
do the research also and cite
Okay.
the, subject to style,
Okay,
cite the
because that is
regulation.
acceptable. The unbundling, there's just a discussion going on here on my right side with DOE. And then on the last one, we have a similar amendment. Well, it is yours, which we accept,
Yeah.
not engaging in anti-competitive behavior. So we also accept that.
Thank you,
So,
Mr.
Mr. President, there were 3 items enumerated. Were there letters? The first and the third are accepted. The second is still.
So how will this section read?
So, I will ask for a suspension again because I will be, so I can respond to the second item, which is,
All right.
I'm not yet ready to respond to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Session suspended.
We are prepared to accept the 3 items submitted by His Honor. The first is subject to style. The second one on unbundling, I just want to give a reason why it initially was not included in those that we accepted kasi kinasuhan daw ang DOE
Yes, oo.
dahil dyan. But in principle, they're
Walang
okay
legal-
with it. So I said, so let's accept it. So,
Yeah.
so basically, all His Honor's amendments are accepted, subject to style for the first item.
Okay, any objection? There being none, the amendments are approved.
Thank you, Mr.
Subject
President.
to
Just
style.
to add to that, Mr. President, that's precisely why we included the unbundling, is because of that case filed by the downstream oil players, because DOE released a circular to mandate them to unbundle, so that we will exactly know how much they purchase, how much is the transportation cost, how much is their profit take. But fortunately, it was struck down because there's no legal basis to that
Okay.
effect. So we're now putting the legal basis, Mr. President.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any more, Senator
So-
Gatchalian? On page 26, before the sponsor makes her own amendments.
My next one is on page 26, line 11. So,
Yeah, Mr. President,
and it is
I,
also your
yeah.
amendment.
yeah, Mr.
So-
President, I think we have the same amendment to that effect.
Senator Cayetano, you can proceed
Yes,
with
okay.
your amendment.
So on page 26, line 11, delete the phrase "other activities in relation to the," and then on the same page, line 11 to 12, delete the phrase "value chain projects" and replace it with "facilities." We submit.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
And then on the same page, line 12, delete the phrase "be included in tier 3 of the," and replace it with "undergo an evaluation process for possible inclusion in an entitlement of incentives under the." We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 16, delete the phrase "moreover, the registered project shall also." And on the same page, delete line 17 to 22.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On the same page, lines 23 to 24, and continuing to page 27, lines 1 to 14, transfer the entire subsection II to page 26 after line 18 as a new paragraph. We submit.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 27, delete lines 15 to 17. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion's approved. Do you have any other
But,
amendments?
Mr. President, we submitted that amendment to Her
Yes.
Honor, and it
Yes,
was
before
carried.
Senator Pia Cayetano proposes her amendments on, starting on page 28, do you have any other amendments on page 28?
No, Mr. President. I
Okay,
don't.
Senator Pia, you may proceed.
The next amendments, Mr. President, are fairly simple. On page 28, line 7, delete 16 and replace it with 18.
Any objection? There being none, motion, amendments approved.
On page 28, line 13, delete section 32 and replace it with section 33.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 28, line 14, delete section 33 and replace it with section 34.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 28, line 15, delete section 34 and replace it with section 35.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 28, line 17, delete 35 and replace it with 37.
37, not 36.
37.
37.
Yes, 37.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved. Tumalun eh.
Tumalun na. Thank you for noticing, but it is correct. On page 29, line 1, delete section 37 and replace it with section 39.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you. The next item, Mr. President, is on page 30, line 9. After the word assignee, insert a new sentence.
Before you propose
yes.
any amendments, Senator Gatchalian, do you have any amendments?
Yes, Mr. President,
On
also on the
page-
same, page 30, line 9.
Yes.
Line 9?
Yeah.
This
What
is
is your-
yours. This is
Ah,
your
okay, it's the
amendment.
same amendment, Mr.
Okay, please
President.
proceed, Senator Pia.
So on page 30, line 9, after the word assignee, insert a new sentence which shall read as, provided that this applies to sales of shares that would result in a change in control of the permit holder or its ultimate parent. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On the same page, delete lines 10 to 11. This is also a Senator Gatchalian amendment.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, just on that same line, lines 9, after the word assignee, we actually talked about this. I have another addition, a proviso towards the end of that amendment. And the proviso reads as follows: provided further that the assignment or transfers shall not be allowed near the end of life of a PDNGI facility. And that was discussed earlier, Mr. President, that we will clarify this, that the transfer should not allow circumvention of decommissioning and
Yes.
other costs, subject to style, Mr.
Yes,
President.
we accept that, Mr. President, and we will we'll work together with His Honor for the wording on that.
All right.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Mr. President. With the indulgence of the good sponsor, when she started earlier, I missed the first parts, Mr.
Okay.
President, and I have just a few items on the first parts, Mr. President. On line 16, page 2, line 16, delete the
Page 2?
page 2, Mr. President, because I missed the first parts, Mr.
President, this
President.
is an
Anterior, yeah.
Okay.
I thought the proposed amendment came from the proponent.
Came from?
Yes, Mr. President.
Came from whom?
From the proponent, Mr.
The
President.
proponent.
Okay.
So on page 16,
Oh,
on page 2, line 16, delete the phrase, "the financial viability of the PDNGI by liberalizing," Mr. President. And the rationale for this, Mr. President, the financial viability is a business decision, and entities who are going to go into this business should obviously take note of the financial viability of their business and also of the industry. It's not the responsibility of the government to assure the financial viability of those entities going into this industry, Mr. President. So that's the rationale, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
Mr. President, we initially rejected this because it is really our belief that we need to promote that environment where coming to the Philippines and investing in indigenous gas is really something that is going to be supported. We know very well, we've had numerous discussions in Create and Create More on creating that environment. Having said that, we understand His Honor's concern, and although we stand by that principle, I'm just happy to accept it because it's not really a big, it's just a declaration of policy.
So you're
and-
accepting the amendments?
Yes, in the hope that His Honor will not have any more.
Mr. President, just a minor amendments, Mr. President.
We will.
Accepted,
we will
without
act on the-
conditions.
We will act on the amendment, your proposed amendment. Is there an objection? There being none, the proposed amendment has been accepted by the sponsor. An objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on the same page in line 18, after the word attaining, replace the phrase fair prices for all stakeholders with the phrase low-cost energy prices pursuant to Republic Act number 7638 or the Department of Energy Act of 1992. And this is for consistency purposes because in RA 7638, it calls for low-cost energy price, Mr. President, as one of the core mandates of the DOE, Mr. President. So just for consistency purposes, Mr. President.
We will wait for the reply of the sponsor.
Yes, I need a minute, Mr.
Yes.
President.
Session suspended.
And accepted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for
Is there an
the-
objection? There being none, the proposed amendment has been accepted by the sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the reconsideration. I thank the good sponsor. On page 3, line 1, replace the word reasonable with the word low cost. So move, Mr. President.
Replace the word.
Replace the word reasonable with the word
We
low
already
cost.
accepted that when we read His
Okay,
Honor's
Mr.
earlier
President.
amendments.
All right, Mr. President. Sorry, Mr. President, if I will repeat some of the amendments because I
It's
missed
okay,
the
I'll
first
just
part.
let you know if it's already
Yeah,
been
okay.
accepted.
On the same line, after the word pricing of natural gas, insert the phrase pursuant to Republic Act number 7638 or the Department of Energy Act of 1992.
Yes, that has already been
Okay.
proposed and accepted.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 3, line 7, after the word aggregation, accepted nito. I believe this is
We
accepted
accepted
already.
also.
All right, Mr. President. On page 4, line 11, before the word taking, insert the phrase that will result to a least cost price end. So move, Mr. President.
Oh, Mr. President, that one was rejected for the reasons I have been explaining earlier about the importance of looking at the bigger picture, looking at the long term, knowing that the indigenous gas has been lower by far over the span of many years. So the assurance that the exact specific lease cost as proposed by His Honor would be the determining factor. We cannot accept that.
Senator Win?
Yes, Mr. President, I'm just, sorry for the delay. I'm just reading the provisions once again. Mr. President, one of the reasons for aggregation is to use the supposedly low price of indigenous gas and then mix it with supposedly higher prices of LNG. And the objective is to bring the price down, Mr. President. So if that is the objective, Mr. President, then putting the word least cost remains consistent with that objective. I remember during the interpellation, Mr. President, Her Honor mentioned that the indigenous gas throughout the years remains to be very low. And one of the ideas or one of the concepts of aggregation is to mix it with imported LNG because imported LNG supposedly is much more expensive. No? And the goal there of mixing or aggregating in this sense is to achieve low cost or least cost for the consumer, Mr. President. So the proposal just assures the consumer that aggregation will lead to least cost, Mr. President, because that's eventually, that's actually the core idea of why we are aggregating, Mr. President, is to take advantage of the low price of indigenous gas, Mr. President. And that's also the concept of aggregation in other jurisdictions, Mr. President, to take advantage of the low cost of supply and mix it with imported supply so that we achieve on the average a competitive price for our consumers, Mr. President. So it's just formalizing that idea, Mr. President, into this provision, this proposal, Mr. President. So it's not deviating. This is only insofar as aggregation, Mr. President. So we're not talking about the prioritization as what we have discussed earlier in Section 22. This is only to aggregation. And aggregation, the objective is to average out the cost. What's the point of aggregating if the prices will not go down? So that's one of the key ideas of aggregation, is to take advantage of the low cost, supposedly low cost of indigenous supply.
His Honor is not incorrect, no? But when you look at the bigger picture, the purpose of aggregation is lower cost and also securing a stable natural gas prices, because the prices, as I have shown with imported LNG, fluctuates a lot. So when you aggregate, you ask the different importers to buy in bulk. Let's buy in bulk. So for example, importer number 1 can buy this small amount. Importer number 2, maybe a little bit more. Importer number 3, small amount. Together, they increase their purchasing power. So that is one on its own, just the purchasing power of these importers on LNG, imported natural gas alone. And then you bring in the picture of indigenous natural gas. The objective here being is energy security in addition to lower prices. So when you combine it, there may be days that it's extremely low compared to what's out there. There may be days that it's even lower, and there may be days that it's not so low. So I cannot guarantee that every single day that you compare the price, it will be the least cost. But in the long term, it is definitely a lower cost because you have a bigger, I mean, it's common sense. It's the law of economics. Marami kayong bibili, yung purchasing power mo malaki. So clearly, ang patutunguhan doon is mas mababang presyo. And then the same with the indigenous gas, mas marami din ang pinapasok natin na mag-invest dito, mag-explore, mas bababa yung price. But on any given particular day, I cannot predict that every single day it's the least cost. Kaya ho ako hindi makapag-oo sa inyong proposal dun sa mga salitang the least cost. Pero tama ho yung logic nyo, na yung patutunguhan nitong aggregation is to be able to improve our bargaining power and to get the best possible prices, the best price in the market now. Maybe tomorrow, biglang bumaba yung presyo, yung nabili natin today, hindi kasing mura nung tomorrow. Pero because marami tayong bumili, at least okay pa rin. Para kung bumaba na hindi naman natin kasi makpe-predict yun. But we're always better. We always have more bargaining power when we are doing this as an aggregator, Mr. President. So just that phrase, least cost, I can work with this honor if there's other language. It's just that I think we agree in what we're trying to achieve. I just don't want to give false hopes in this statement that every single purchase is the least cost.
I understand the explanation of good sponsor, Mr. President. I'm looking at the powers that we give DOE, and in this provision, it's required to come up with a minimum percentage, Mr. President.
Yes.
If we can introduce some language, I'm open to giving DOE that power to also make sure that prices are low, prices are competitive, something to that effect, Mr. President, subject to style, Mr. President. So it's not just resulting to least cost, but let DOE come up with a mechanism other than the minimum requirement, but also taking into consideration or putting it into the equation competitiveness and low prices. No, something to that effect, Mr. President.
Yeah, I don't mind, Mr. President, like something to the effect that says bearing in mind that aggregation will.
Taking into consideration.
Aggregation will result in the best possible prices.
Yes.
Things like that.
Something
We're
like
open,
that.
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. We'll just submit to her sponsor, the good sponsor, language to that effect.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll submit that later on. And on page 4, line 16, after the phrase Section 4B of this act, insert the phrase that will result to least cost price, which is the same concept, Mr. President.
So same.
Same, so we'll submit,
work on it, yeah.
So the concept that we will be submitting is to give DOE the power, not only to determine the minimum percentage, but also competitive pricing or
Yes.
some form of pricing formula.
Maximizing the power of aggregation.
Yeah. Right. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, that's it for this representation, and I thank the good sponsor for her patience, for her openness, as well as for her generous explanation of some of the provisions. And thank you very much to Senator Pia for her patience. Maraming salamat.
You're very welcome, Mr. President.
Senator Pia, do you still have any more amendments?
No more, Mr. President.
Ano more?
Mr. President,
Wala na ba talaga? Still early.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2793. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, we have several simple resolutions to be adopted. Mr. President, I move that we consider the proposed Senate Resolution number 1210, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution 1212. This is the resolution commending and congratulating Tashiana Kisha Mangin for winning the gold medal in the women's 49 kilogram category at the World Taekwondo Junior Championships held in Chuncheon, South Korea from October 1 to 6, 2024. So, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. The resolution is hereby adopted.
President, another resolution is that I move that we consider the proposed Senate Resolution 1219. This is the resolution congratulating and commending Muhammad Nur Kasib of the Philippine Science High School, Central Mindanao Campus for securing the Philippines' first ever gold medal at the International Astronomy and Astrophysics Olympiad 2024 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved. The resolution is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, I move that we consider and adopt proposed Senate Resolution 1220. This is the resolution congratulating and commending CJ Opiaza for finishing first runner-up in Miss Grand International 2024 held last week, October 25, 2024 in Bangkok, Thailand.
Are you going to invite her here? No.
We will ask the Secretariat
Okay.
to invite,
Is there an objection?
to accommodate the Senate President pro tempore for a photo opportunity.
There being none, motion is approved. The resolution is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, I move that we consider the proposed Senate Resolution 1221. This is a resolution congratulating and commending the Philippine Junior Men's Artistic Gymnastics team led by Carl Eldrew Yulo and Jacob Alvarez for their outstanding achievements at the JRC Artistic Stars Championships in Thailand.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved. The resolution is hereby adopted.
Mr. Mr. President, I move that we consider the proposed Senate Resolution 1222. This is the resolution congratulating and commending the Philippine men's baseball team for winning their 5th consecutive title in the East Asia Baseball Cup.
Is there an
moved, Mr. President.
objection? There being none, motion is approved. The resolution is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the second additional reference of business.
Secretary, please read the additional reference of business.
Bills on first reading, Senate Number 2864, strengthening the Philippine Coast Guard by introducing policy and organizational reforms, Senator Tulfo.
Committees on Public Services, Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation, Ways and Means and Finance.
2865, amending sections 22, 32, 34, 38, 39, 42, 127, 174, 176, 179, 199, and 258 of RA 8424, the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended for other purposes, Senator Gatchalian.
Ways and Means.
Committee Report 334, submitted jointly by the Committees on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises, Foreign Relations, Ways and Means, Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, and Finance on Senate Number 2863 with Senators Legarda, Estrada, Revilla Jr., Ontiveros, Villar M., and Go as authors, and not providing for a pension differential to the Department of Foreign Affairs retirees, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Numbers 829, 1293, 1404, 1510, 1529, and 1706, taking into consideration House Number 10466, sponsor Senator Villar M.
Calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there is still an administrative matter to
Meron.
pursue. I move that we elect Senator Joel Villanueva as a member of the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations, the Blue Ribbon Committee. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved. Senator Joel Villanueva has been elected as a member of the Blue Ribbon Committee.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, November 5, 2024.
There an objection? There hearing none. There being none, session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of November 5, 2024.
Thank you, Mr. President.